I want to start with something most people won't say out loud. At 75 years old, I fell for someone hard. The kind of hard that surprises you because you assumed that particular chapter of your life was finished. You assumed the feelings that come with new love, the nervousness, the giddiness, the way you catch yourself smiling for no reason. You assumed all of that had quietly packed its bags and left years ago. It hadn't. His name was Frank. He was 58 years old. I was 75. And for 14 months, he was the most present, most engaged, most alive relationship I had experienced since losing my husband Raymond 11 years prior. Now, before I go any further, I want to be very clear about something. This is not a cautionary tale exactly. It is not a warning. It is not me sitting here telling you that what I did was foolish or reckless or something I regret wholesale. It is something more complicated and more honest than that. It is me telling you everything nobody told me. The things I had to find out for myself, one slow realization at a time, over 14 months of something that was genuinely, undeniably real. I spent 38 years as a registered nurse in Nashville. I have seen more of the human condition than most people see in 3 lifetimes. I am not easily fooled, and I was not a fool in this situation, but I was surprised. Over and over again, I was surprised. And those surprises, the beautiful ones, the difficult ones, and the ones that arrived quietly in the night, like a cold draft under the door, those are what I'm here to talk about today. So settle in, because nobody is going to tell you this stuff. Nobody talks about what it is actually like to fall for someone 17 years younger than you when you are 75 years old. I'm going to change that right now. Let me give you the landscape first, because it matters. I was married to Raymond for 41 years. We met in 1971 at a church potluck in Nashville, which is exactly as wholesome as it sounds. He was an electrical engineer, a quiet man with a dry sense of humor and an extraordinary talent for listening. We had 3 children. We built a life together that was, by honest measure, a good one. Not perfect. No marriage of 41 years is, but solid, warm, full of the accumulated history that becomes its own form of love. Raymond died of pancreatic cancer in 2013. From diagnosis to the end was 9 weeks. One day we were planning a trip to see our grandchildren, and 9 weeks later I was standing in a cemetery trying to remember how to breathe. I will not spend too long on grief, because this story is not about grief. But I will say that the years between Raymond's death and meeting Frank were years I learned to inhabit my own company in a new way. I moved from the big family house into a smaller place with a sunroom, which is where I'm sitting right now. I kept nursing until I retired at 70. I have 4 grandchildren who I love more than oxygen. I have a small but fiercely loyal circle of friends. I garden, I read. I walk 3 miles every morning, which my knees complain about, but my mind requires. By the time I met Frank, I was not adrift, not desperate, not a woman in need of rescuing. I was a settled, clear-eyed, deeply rooted 75-year-old who had simply, entirely unexpectedly met someone interesting. That distinction matters. I met Frank at a continuing education seminar, of all things. I still take them occasionally, even in retirement, because I like to stay current and because sitting still bores me to tears. This one was on advances in geriatric care. Frank was there because he works in healthcare administration, hospital operations. He sat across the table from me, and at the lunch break he said, "You look like someone who has a strong opinion about the morning presenter's third point, and I'd love to hear it." He was right. I had an extremely strong opinion. I shared it. He laughed. We talked straight through lunch, and were 10 minutes late getting back to the afternoon session. He was 58. I found that out a week later, after we had already exchanged numbers. When he told me, I went quiet. He said simply, "Does that change things for you?" I said, "I honestly don't know yet." That was the truth. I knew I had enjoyed talking to him more than most people in years. I knew he was smart and funny and curious. I thought about our lunch conversation for the next 3 days, which is not something I do easily. So we got coffee, and then we got dinner. And then somewhere around the 4th or 5th time we saw each other, I stopped pretending to myself that this was a casual friendship and acknowledged what it actually was. The beginning was simply wonderful. I'm not going to dress it up or qualify it. It was wonderful. Frank had a quality I have rarely encountered in men of any age, which is that he paid attention. Not performed attention, real, retained, referenced later attention. He would remember things I mentioned in passing weeks prior and circle back to them. He asked follow-up questions. He was present in a way that felt increasingly rare in this world, and he was interested in my life specifically, my years of nursing, my children, my marriage to Raymond. He was not threatened by my love for Raymond, was not competing with the dead man, but genuinely wanted to understand who Raymond was and what our life had been. That generosity of spirit moved me enormously. I was happy, uncomplicated, genuine, morning smile happy, for the first time in a long time. Here is what nobody tells you first, the good surprises. Everyone wants to talk about the complications, and we will get there, I promise. But if I skip over the genuine gifts of this experience, I am being dishonest, and dishonesty is the one thing I simply refuse. The first surprise was how much his energy recalibrated mine. Frank was 58, which is not young in the absolute sense, but relative to me it was a different register entirely. He moved through the world with a forward-facing orientation I had started to lose. He made plans that extended 5 and 10 years out with easy confidence. Being around that perspective was, I can only describe it as aerating, like opening windows in a room that had gotten a little close. I started walking further. I started saying yes to things I had been quietly declining. I went to a live outdoor concert, something I hadn't done in 8 years. Small shifts, maybe, but the cumulative effect was real. The second surprise was how little the age difference mattered in the day-to-day texture of being together. When you are inside a relationship, the numbers have almost no presence. You are simply two people having dinner or walking or disagreeing about something or laughing until your eyes water. The arithmetic dissolves. It only reappeared when something external forced it back in, a comment from someone else, a logistics question about the future, a moment when our different physical realities announced themselves. But in the ordinary flow of being together, the age difference was nearly invisible. The third surprise was what it did for my sense of self. Being genuinely desired at 75 by someone who had every option available, that did something I didn't expect. It is not about beauty exactly, though that is part of it. It is about relevance, about mattering in the present tense. I had been moved, without quite realizing it, to a kind of honorary status, respected, loved by family, but no longer in the active story. Frank put me back in the active story. I am grateful for that. And now the other side. The first hard surprise was the fatigue of mismatch. Not dramatic, not daily, but cumulative. Frank, at 58, operated at a pace that was simply different from mine. He recovered faster. He needed less sleep. He could go from a long week straight into a full weekend without the particular kind of bone-level tiredness that I experience, and that is simply the reality of a 75-year-old body, even a healthy one. I found myself choosing between honesty about my limits and performing a more resilient version of myself. I chose the performance more often than I should have. Not because Frank demanded it. He never made me feel bad about needing rest. But the old human terror of being seen as diminished is apparently still alive at 75. Even after all those years of nursing, watching people fight that terror and lose time they could have spent being honest. The second hard surprise was what I came to think of as the calendar problem. Frank and I were in different relationships with time, not philosophically. Those conversations were among the richest I have had with anyone, but practically. When Frank imagined the future, it was expansive. He thought in decades. When I imagine the future, I think in careful, clear-eyed segments. I know from watching a great many people navigate the end of their lives that I am likely in the last chapter. My health is good, my family lives long, but the last chapter, yes. Building something with someone in a middle chapter who will almost certainly outlive you by decades creates a particular tenderness and a particular sadness that live right next to each other, inseparable. The third hard surprise was how other people behaved. Not everyone, but enough. The looks in restaurants. A comment from someone in my book club who said, with a smile that wasn't quite a smile, "Well, aren't you adventurous?" My younger son, who sat at my kitchen table and said carefully, "Mom, I just want to make sure you've thought about what happens when," and didn't finish the sentence because the end was too uncomfortable for both of us. I had thought about it more than any of them realized. Frank and I were not people who avoided things. When something needed to be said, we said it, which meant some of our conversations were not easy. We talked about what we were building toward. The honest answer, something real and mutual, but not toward the same horizon. He would not be cared for by me when he was elderly. The arithmetic made that impossible. I might be cared for by him, and we talked about that directly, because I am a nurse and have long since made peace with plainness. I told him that I would not allow the relationship to become his obligation. That at the first sign of it turning into a duty he was honoring rather than a life he was choosing, I would let him go without rancor and without guilt. I meant it. He said he understood. I believe he did. We talked about children. He had none, and said clearly it wasn't something he wanted. I believed him. I still do. But I also know that what a person believes about themselves at 58 can shift by 63, and I held that knowledge quietly. These are never easy conversations. They require the courage to see a thing clearly while you are still inside it. I am proud we had them. Not everyone does. I spent nearly 4 decades as a nurse. The body is not a mystery to me, and false modesty is not one of my weaknesses. So I will tell you what my body had to say, because it is relevant, and almost no one discusses it. At 75, my body is healthy, but not the same body it was at 55. I have arthritis in my hands, manageable but present. I wake at 4 in the morning with some regularity. I have the physical reality of a post-menopausal woman in her mid-70s, which comes with its own specific landscape. What I did not expect was how much this would test my self-acceptance. Not because Frank made it an issue. He was genuinely unconcerned with the physical markers of my age. What I hadn't anticipated was my own internal critic, who had a great deal to say. I had considered myself a self-accepting person, but being with someone 17 years younger activated a self-consciousness I thought I had outgrown. I compared myself to women of his generation in ways that were neither fair nor useful. I had to do real work, conscious, deliberate work, to return to what was actually true. Frank was exactly where he chose to be, and was not cataloging my deficiencies. That work was good for me in the long run, but it was work. I want you to know it was work. We were together for 14 months. The ending was not dramatic, and it was not caused by any single thing. It was caused by the accumulated weight of the things I have described. The calendar problem, the life stage gap, the growing sense on my part that I was asking him by remaining to make a choice that might not serve him well. He did not want to end it. Frank was not looking for an exit. He was, to the last conversation, committed to what we had. The decision was mine, and making a decision that someone you love does not want you to make is one of the harder experiences available to a human being, even when you are certain it is right. I told him that I loved him, and I do, but that I could see the shape of what was ahead more clearly than he could at his age, and that what I could see told me I needed to let him go while there was still time for him to build the life that would sustain him through his own later chapters. A life with someone who could be there alongside him for 20 or 30 more years. I could not offer him that, and offering it would have been a lie. He sat with that. Then he said, "You are the most clear-eyed person I have ever known." I took that as the gift he meant it to be. We hugged at the door. I watched him drive away. Then I came inside and sat in this sunroom and cried for a very long time, which was the right response to losing something real. All right, here is the part I came here to give you, the things nobody tells you. Nobody tells you that love at 75 feels just as large as it did at 35. The capacity does not diminish. Having lived enough to know how rare genuine connection is makes you feel it more acutely. When it arrives late, it is not a smaller thing. It is immense. Nobody tells you that a significant age difference past a certain point is not primarily about attraction or energy. It is about time, about the asymmetry of two people in genuinely different relationships with how much of it they have left. That asymmetry is manageable, even beautiful in certain lights. But it will ask you to hold someone you love somewhat loosely because you know the grip will have to open eventually. Nobody tells you that your harshest critic will be yourself, not your children, not strangers in restaurants. You, the internalized voice asking whether you are being realistic, selfish, whether you are taking something that doesn't belong to you. Be patient with that voice. And be absolutely clear that it does not get to make your decisions. Nobody tells you that the conversations you have with a younger partner about mortality, the future, what you each need and cannot provide, are some of the most important of your life, not because of what is decided, but because of what is clarified. I know myself better for those conversations with Frank than I have in years. Nobody tells you that ending something good because you love someone enough to see what they need more clearly than they can is one of the most loving acts available to you. It does not feel loving in the moment. It feels like loss, which it also is. Both things are true at once. And nobody tells you that on the other side of that loss, you can still be whole. You are allowed to grieve it and also to be grateful for it and also to continue living your life with full presence and no apology. All of those things are permitted. All of those things are appropriate. I am 75 years old. I know who I am. I know what I had and why I let it go. And I am, in the most honest and complicated way, at peace with all of it. I am still here, in this sunroom, in this life I built and love. My grandchildren were here last weekend. We made peach cobbler and played cards until 10 at night, which is extraordinarily late for me and absolutely worth it. I still walk 3 miles every morning. My knees still complain. I am still in my book club with strong opinions that the other members have mostly learned to enjoy. I am still the most organized person in any room I walk into, which Raymond always said was my best and most exhausting quality. Frank and I exchanged a few kind messages after. Then those faded. He is out there living his life. Am I lonely? Sometimes. But I was occasionally lonely even with Frank. Those specific ways that come from knowing you and another person are not quite on the same road. Loneliness is part of the human condition at every age. The goal is not its elimination, but building a life rich enough that it is only one note in a larger piece of music. Do I regret it? Not for a single day. Would I do it again, knowing everything I know? Yes, without hesitation. Here is what I want to leave you with if you are standing at the edge of something unexpected and wondering whether to step in. The fear that you are too old for something is almost always a lie. The capacity for love, for connection, for being seen, that does not have an expiration date. It does not require your body to be what it was at 40. It only requires your willingness to be honest about what you feel, what you need, what you can offer and cannot. Be honest with the person you are with. Be honest with yourself. And be ruthlessly honest about the difference between what you want and what serves you both well. I was 75 years old. A man 17 years younger saw someone worth knowing, worth loving. I was brave enough to say yes, and later brave enough to say goodbye, and both took everything I had. I am still here, still whole, still so grateful, and still, after all of it, grateful to be in this sunroom with these plants and this light and this life that keeps, even now, surprising me.